Hi, I'm Mark Hockel, Forage Agronomist with Eagle Ag Consulting in the Midwest. I have nearly 30 years of agronomy experience, specializing in forages, manure, corn silage, and many of the grain crops. It's that time of year, again, football season. We just finished up the preseason, and it was an exciting one. Unfortunately, some games got a little out of control. But the idea here is when you do the preseason, it's all about getting locked in to start piling up some wins, hopefully for that bowl in the future, right? And so, what I want to remind you of today is why do we do the preseason? And part of the reason there is we want to really start to understand our team. And the same thing here applies with the Pivot Bioproducts. We want to not only know our strengths and weaknesses, but we also have to identify, hey, is there something that we have to watch out for? Think of that as you're talking to those possible customers out there in the field. Where are we going to get product wins and where is it going to be more difficult? So I hope to talk to you a little bit more about that today. Today, let's talk about Proven G3, some of the advantage of it and some of the strengths. So first of all, don't forget it's a weatherproof nitrogen that doesn't leach. And so the secret there is it's taking place right there at the roots, and it's in the ammonium form so that it binds tightly to any soil colloids. It's not going to leach like some of the other products out there would. Secondly, it is the only gene-edited microbe that fixes nitrogen when it's in the presence of nitrogen. And then finally, thirdly, don't forget it's a daily spoon-fed amount of nitrogen coming. So these microbes are working continuously every day, even the day after a heavy rain. There'll be a new fresh amount of ammonium right there for that corn plant to take up. So that is a real win. I like to think of it in a triple shot approach. So number one, it is feeding. And there's a lot of details we can go into of how effective it feeds, but just keep that in mind. It's a daily spoon-fed feeding. Secondly, it's going to boost your yields. It's going to boost the nitrogen in the plant to give you more yield. And then thirdly, it's going to amplify. So hopefully you already have plenty of nutrients out there, and this is just a little extra nitrogen will allow those extra nutrients to give you a better return on investment for your fertilizer spent. Let's talk about the product Proven G3 and how it works. Research has shown that the Proven G3 provides extra nitrogen in the V2 to V5 stage of corn growth. Typically, in most parts of the United States, that's going to occur between May 15th and June 15th. The research also shows that G3 is going to provide about 13% more biomass compared to not having it there, and it is increasing the nitrogen concentration in the leaf 12.5%. The researchers have found that because of this, we really see a bigger, more robust plant. And who benefits from that the most? It's actually the silage growers. So if you think of silage from a perspective is we're selling not only the plant and all that material, but also the grain. And in fact, in silage production, about 50% of the weight that is used or goes into that silage pile or bunker is actually the grain, but 50 to 55% is the plant. And so we can improve that plant size. We're going to increase the silage. Independent research on the Proven 40 product showed that we were picking up about 9/10 of a ton of silage per acre using that product. So almost 1 ton of silage is giving us about 8 bushels of corn. Do the math, $4 corn, that's $32 an acre. That's a doubling your money just on silage increase from the product itself. Secondly, the research has showed that we also tend to see a little bit better quality. So often research like out of Wisconsin and Dr. Lauer has found that early starter fertilizer amendments can increase your silage yield, but most of the time they actually decrease the quality. What's nice about this case is that the research is showing is we're seeing not a negative to quality, but actually a positive. One of the places we see quality that's really impacted in that measurement is actually in the starch content. So the starch would be in the grain, but if we're going to pick up corn silage or the corn plant size, along with a little bit of increase in grain or better starch accumulation in those kernels we have, that's a real win for the quality metric. And to the end producer, the livestock grower, whether it's beef or dairy or whatever they're feeding this silage to, that makes a big difference. One example is just the starch content alone. A 1% change in starch at $4 corn is a $50 an acre advantage. And so all of a sudden, if we can just get 1 point more of starch, we can triple our investment from the G3. That's a win. So to summarize the proven G3 performance, first of all, you got to keep in mind that it is really helping the corn plant early in the growing season. Typically between May 15th and June 15th, that time frame when your corn plant is in that V2 to V5 stage. It's providing about 12% more nitrogen concentration in the plant, which is favorable to getting bigger leaves, higher, longer internodes, and even more shoot initiation, and so potentially more ears. The research on the proven 40 actually showed that we were picking up 9/10 of a ton, so just under a ton, which is about 8 bushels of grain equivalent. And so we're talking about, based off the market, $35 return on investment there. And then finally, if there's any quality that we can pick up, that's going to be a win. And it doesn't take much in the quality metric to really add value to that livestock producer. And keep in mind, just 1% starch increase on $4 corn is a $50 an acre value. One of the things about silage is, in many cases, that silage acre earlier had application of manure. And so let's take a little time to look at manure. Not only in the silage situation, but also hog manure, swine manure, poultry litter, some of the pros and cons, and where maybe one of those might be an easy win for the G3 to come through and add real value to the bottom line. So when we talk about manure, there's something to keep in mind. There is in every manure product, there is a little bit of nitrogen that's easily available or right away, soon available after application, usually in the ammonia form. And then there's, nitrate and nitrite and organic nitrogen and a whole host of different nitrogen components in that manure. So if you think about some of the research done in the 1990s by Dr. Blackmer at the Iowa State University, they developed a test, a soil test at 0 to 12 called PSNT, that stands for pre-sidedress nitrate test. They recognize that in manure scenarios, oftentimes when we have slightly cooler than average springs, it takes time for the nitrogen to mineralize, in other words, become available for that plant. And so any of these manure products, whether we have heavy rains or maybe it was a wet winter or just a cool spring, that nitrogen might not be there for the plant. That's where G3 can fill that gap. Now keep in mind, if they're doing the PSNT, that's only measuring nitrate, and we are actually, the G3 product is ammonia, so it won't show up in that test. But you can be confident, just tell the grower he can be confident that nitrogen is available there for the plant. And the research is showing about 40 to 45. G3 is 45 pounds of nitrogen by university testing. That's perfect. In fact, that's the recommendation that most typically comes back from the university if we aren't getting that mineralization of that manure. Are there other practices that we can look for that would give us the easy wins for the G3? One that I would think of right away off the top of my head is high carbon residue. So think of this, a lot of cover crops out there in the environment right now, they're going to be high in carbon, and the point of them is actually to suck up that free nitrogen that's in the soil so that it doesn't leach or isn't lost. While that's a great practice and fantastic to do, that's that early nitrogen that we're talking about next spring that corn plant needs during that V2 to V time frame. And so just keep that in mind, is that, hey, if they have a grass-based cover crop, G3 would be a great fit to provide nitrogen to that plant. And keep in mind that when we kill that cover crop, it actually doesn't release that nitrogen right away because of that high carbon relationship to the nitrogen that's actually in that cover crop. Michigan State research from about a decade ago shows that it takes about 5 years before you no longer or don't have to apply 40 to 50 pounds of extra nitrogen. I think the research out of Iowa State was 4 years, a little further south, a little faster mineralization, but Minnesota's research matches Michigan State in that 5 years. And so it definitely needs more nitrogen if you have that cover crop. Another case where you might run into that is a corn on corn situation. If there's a lot of residue left behind, that's a high carbon product. You're going to need a little bit more nitrogen, and especially early in the season, that corn on corn, all that residue keeps the soil cooler, so the mineralization is slower, and also is tying up some of that nitrogen because the microbes are consuming that in their effort to break down that corn residue. Finally, one that maybe a lot of you don't think about, but alfalfa actually sucks up the free nitrogen, much like a cover crop would in the spring. And so if you terminate alfalfa in the spring that is greened up, you should apply 40 to 50 pounds more nitrogen to maximize your corn yield. So as I circle back around here, we want to target silage growers. Silage and that corn plant size is the easiest way to get payback. Don't forget about the custom growers. Not every silage grower is livestock farmers, especially at some of these big operations these days. They're hiring a lot of custom growers or buying a lot of product. And so if they grow silage at all, have them try it on their silage first. That's most likely where you're going to get the win. Secondly, think about the manure acres. And then finally, the high residue situations. Cover crops, the spring terminated alfalfa, and then the corn on corn residue situations. All right, the data is starting to come in as fall approaches. Grain yield and harvest are just being documented along with silage. So we're going to know a lot more, but let's talk a little bit first about what we saw in the United States as far as weather this year, so you can understand how to interpret the data better of why sometimes the G3 product may work, or maybe why it was just comparable to the other test. To start with, we had a historically warm April in especially the Midwest, but across much of the United States. In fact, from April 15th to May 15th, soil temperatures at my location here in the Midwest averaged 8 degrees above the 10-year average, which is really significant. And so what happened this spring is we had a lot of mineralization. Most of the US was quite dry last fall, and so there was very little loss of nitrogen, and a lot of nitrogen was mineralized in April this year. Take a look at this map of the N-loss simulation through June 30th of 2025. On the left, you can see what we saw through the US in 2024 and how there was quite a bit of loss due to heavy rainfall, especially through much of the Midwest, not as much as the Eastern Corn Belt. That's the case or scenario where the Pivot Bio, the Proven 40, and the G3 are going to work really well because it's in a non-leachable form. In contrast, to the right, you see in 2025, in those areas, and there was very little of the United States that actually saw heavy N losses. But I want you to keep this chart in mind as you see the results start to come back in, as far as why perhaps something worked last year and didn't work as well this year, or vice versa. Really try to focus on where there is a deficiency, and that we don't have to necessarily have a loss of nitrogen from heavy rainfall. Just maybe the cover crop took it up. Even on a warm season, we should see a benefit there. Or an operation where they want to really get efficient, and maybe they're just going to put G3 on the corn to get it started, and then come back and side dress later for maximum efficiency. It also works very well under irrigation, where they might not turn on the pivots till the mid-June, and the nitrogen is coming through there. So each one of those scenarios can work to your benefit. Just a few agronomic reminders as we ensure balanced fertility. Remember, with the G3 product, we're going to have increased levels of nitrogen in the plant. But to be balanced, sometimes we need other nutrients to come along. We want the nitrogen to be the limiting factor, not the other nutrients. Two of the nutrients that come to mind with increased nitrogen are potassium. Make sure you have enough potassium out there. But the critical one, and especially that we saw here in 2025 with the cool May to June after we had the warm April, was we saw sulfur deficiencies frequently in a lot of the fields across the United States. Make sure you have enough sulfur out there to match the nitrogen so that you get that extra yield. So look forward to the new data coming in, the new information on the G3 product, and don't be afraid to reach out to your local agronomist or your rep to help understand what is going on, why, and help you position that product for successful wins for the next year.